Well, hello again. This is Mike from Music City. We're back with another installment of our ranking records. This happens to be number 6. And we're going to take a little shift in genre here and go to one of my favorite genres and one that I was really absorbed into back in the day, and that's country rock. And we're going to look today at the music of one of my all-time favorite bands, Poco. It was a band that I was absolutely wild about in my college days in the 70s. Um, we're going to modify what we look at, though. Poco is one of those bands that's kind of gone on forever. If you read my blog, I did a story a couple of years ago called Bands That Will Never Die. And these are the bands who keep just changing personnel, and after a while you got no one even, close to anyone who was in the original band. That's unfortunately happening with Poco. But we're going to focus on Poco from its inception through 1973 when Richie Furay was with the band. Richie, one of my all-time favorite musicians, probably my first musical hero that I had in life. And I thought about how many albums they had, and interestingly enough, the first record without Richie they called Poco 7, so that told me there were 6 records. And as you'll see in a little bit, we're going to twist the rules a little bit and actually include a live album among the 6, and we'll tell you why a little bit later. But let me start first with a little background about Poco and some of the personnel shifts that we saw during those first 6 records, because I think it's kind of interesting. But Poco started when Buffalo Springfield fell apart. Richie was a founding member and a pretty important member of that seminal band in terms of folk country rock movement, and formed Poco with Jimmy Messina, guitar player, and Rusty Young, pedal steel guitar player, who he worked with on that last Springfield record. And the bass player was Randy Meisner, who later became an Eagle, and the drummer was George Grantham. Well, Meisner had a falling out with the band, and I think, as legend goes, his picture was actually airbrushed off of the cover. I don't remember if that's true, but it sounds great, doesn't it? And he left the band, and before they, got anywhere, he was replaced. I think Messina played bass probably on the first tour, and he was later replaced by Timothy B. Schmidt. And here's the real interesting story. Later on, when Meisner left the Eagles, guess who he was replaced by? Timothy B. Schmidt. So Timmy Schmidt had the reputation of twice replacing Randy Meisner as a bass player, first in Poco and then later on in the Eagles. Jimmy Messina left Poco after their third record and was replaced by Paul Cotton on guitar. And Messina, of course, went on to be part of Loggins and Messina and had a pretty spectacular career there. And that's one of the things about the original Poco we'll probably talk about as we go through these records. The band never really got the degree of success that I think it rightfully deserved. I know it frustrated Richie Furay. That's part of the reason why he left in 1973 after that 6th record. We'll talk about that a little bit as well too. But let's look at some of the records. This was really kind of tricky for me. I really love all these 6 records. I played them to death in my car on 8-track, actually, and I had all those 8-tracks too, and strangely enough, a long story, but I lost them in a poker game. True story. I gave them up in a poker game. But let's talk about the records, and we'll learn a lot more about the band as we go through. But number 6 is actually going to be the last record that Furay was with the band, and that's called Crazy Eyes. And this came out late in 1973, and I had seen my first Poco shows just before the release of this record. It was sort of the tail end of the tour for the previous album, which is Good Feeling to Know. This album came out after Richie had actually left the band, and a good record. I mean, it's we put it at the bottom, when we'll use that friendly term called least favorite. Some really good stuff in here. The title track, Crazy Eyes, I wouldn't call it a country rock song, but just a beautiful, beautiful very suspenseful sounding song, beautifully produced. And it is a tribute to one of my other musical heroes who I'm sure we'll cover some point in time, and that's the late, great Graham Parsons. Interestingly enough, Parsons was asked to join the original Poco, and it would have been really fascinating to see how that would have worked out. But, of course, he went on at that time to form the Flying Burrito Brothers. And another thing about this Crazy Eyes record is Graham Parsons' Brass Buttons, Richie performs here. And, you know, Parsons had died at the time, and actually this release came out before the Grievous Angel album, which had Parsons' own version of Brass Buttons. So kind of interesting there. A couple of other good songs on here. You know, Furay was always good for the, you know, the show closing, you know, round up country rock song, and we had one here called Let's Dance Tonight, which one of those, again, Furay songs that should have been a hit but wasn't. But that's where we wind up on the bottom here of the 6 with Crazy Eyes. Next up, again, I love all of these records. I wish I could have put them all number 1. But this is the second album, self-titled, called Poco. It would be the first album to feature Timothy B. Schmidt, you know, on the album. Jimmy Messina's also would be on the record too, and it's a good record. It's got some really good tracks. You Better Think Twice, which was a real peppy, great song that Messina had done. The other thing I wanted to mention here is the record closes the second half with a jam on Nobody's Fool, which was a song, I think that it was on an earlier, the first record. I can't remember. Yeah, it was off the first record. And man, it's a really good 17-minute jam. For a while, you think you were listening to a Santana record. So kind of a little diversion from their country rock. But Poco, great record. And now this is getting, man, it even gets tougher as we go through here. And just before I sat down to rank these records, I went ahead and changed my order. But number 4, the album that really got me into Poco, you know, I was young guy, and this is the album that I started with and went backwards on, and that's the record, A Good Feelin' to Know. And A Good Feelin' to Know, probably the most well-known Richie Furay song, just a fantastic song. You know, would always be the last song in the set. And after Furay had left the band, I saw them regularly because I was still so enamored with them. And the band still would close with this song with Timothy Schmidt, I believe, was doing the lead vocal. Such a great song. Go and Say Goodbye is on here, a Stephen Stills song that Furay reprised on this record that was on one of the Buffalo Springfield records. Let's see, and Settling Down, another good Furay song. Just Good Feeling to Know, a good record. And this is the one that a lot of people thought were going to break the band. Everybody thought that Good Feeling to Know, I mean, talking about the Poco fans, it was going to be a big hit. And it just never happened. And I think, again, sadly, just kind of building up that disappointment in Richie. Number 3, the debut album, Picking Up the Pieces. And what an important record this was. I really think, in terms of seminal country rock movement records, this one's right up there. And has some really classic stuff. The title track, fantastic song. Grand Junction, an instrumental with Rusty Young, really showing what a great pedal steel player he is. And interesting enough, we'll talk about it right now. When Furay left Poco, they kind of carried on in sort of the country rock tradition for a while. The shows got a little bit odd. You know, Rusty Young would really go crazy on his pedal steel, like he was almost a heavy metal performer, getting on his knees in front of the stage and making wild, crazy noises. And the band from there kind of really morphed in a strange way, where Rusty Young stepped in front of away from the pedal steel and became one of the lead singers in the band, and they had quite a few hits, more so in the middle of the road area. You know some of the songs, I just can't remember some of the names now, that were big hits for the band. Strangely enough, it's always reminiscent to me of how Peter Gabriel left Genesis and Phil Collins stepped away from the drums and the band was bigger than ever. So very an odd thing that happened to Poco, and I said that they really morphed into a very much different band. although they still did respect the tradition of country rock, you know, for the most part. But again, getting back to picking up the pieces, just a great record. A friend of mine recently, we were talking about this record, and he said maybe it was a little too fiddly for him, and I kind of get what he's saying. It kind of was just not really where the band eventually got, I think, with their signature sound. Maybe a little more leaning towards country than the country rock thing, but just very, very, very important record. Next, number 2, From the Inside, the band's 4th record and the first featuring Paul Cotton on guitar. Now, I don't have anything personally against Paul Cotton. He just wasn't my favorite type of singer. I think maybe his songs kind of were a little twangy for me. He came to the band. He was with a band called the Illinois Speed Press, who had put out an album prior. He was a great guitar player, and the thing about it, though, is one of Poco's all-time favorite songs, one of my all-time favorite songs, is on this record, and you may know this one. That's the song called Bad Weather. Just a great, great song. And as I was going through this, I started thinking, why doesn't some country band today cover that song? I think it would be a hit again today for someone. So if anybody's listening, Paul Cotton's Bad Weather on the From the Inside record. The other thing about this record, possibly my favorite Richie Furay song that he's ever done, and that's called Just for Me and You. Just a great, great bouncy country rocker. Richie singing is just fantastic, and I recommend to you, go to YouTube, Google Poco, Just for Me and You. There's a live version of this from the British show, The Old Grey Whistle Test, that is just fabulous. One of my best performance videos to watch and enjoy. Let's play off that word performance. The thing about Poco is Poco was just a spectacular live band. I went to see 3 shows in the matter of a week in 1973. I just got my driver's license and really kind of went a little nuts. We went and saw them down at Asbury Park at Convention Hall. Then I think a few days later, they played a stadium show at Roosevelt Stadium in Jersey City, opening for the Beach Boys. And then they played the Woolman Rink in Central Park. So I think I saw 3 shows in about 5 days, and I was just a fan for life. And I just thought, man, my life's never going to change again. I'm just going to be the biggest Richie Furay Poco fan forever. And then what happened, and remember, these were the days before the internet and news traveled by word of mouth, and a friend of mine called me and he said, did you hear Richie Furay left Poco? And I don't even remember, honestly, where he heard about it, but it would have been the kind of thing you would have had to wait for the next issue of Rolling Stone or something to find out. Somehow he found out. And Richie was gone, and it was sad for me. And as some of you may know, his next move after that was he was the Souther Hillman Furay Band with J.D. Souther and Chris Hillman, and we may talk about them at some point. Very, very interesting band. And again, Richie's disappointment seeing Jimmy Messina and Timmy Schmidt achieve this big fame, it just eluded him, and they thought SHF was going to really take off. It never really did, and the records were good, but they were more like 3 solo records than a band. Richie did some good stuff with that, and I enjoyed those shows, very much. So, but great live band, Poco. Does it surprise you that the best Poco album ever, and also their best-selling album ever, is a live album, and it's called Poco Delivering? And again, breaking the rules a little bit, it's not your typical live album because we had several songs here. I Guess You Made It, Come On, Hear That Music. This is the only place you can find these songs. I think 1 or 2 of them may have surfaced later on as outtakes. But for the most part, yep, we had brand new songs here, and just fantastic. Recorded with Messina and with Schmidt. Boston and New York, they were recorded at. And man, you just listen to this, you just hear the live energy of just what a great, great live band they were. And if you notice, I'll hold up a little closer, mine was autographed. I got to see Richie last year perform at my father's place, at the new My Father's Place out in Roslyn, Long Island, where he did this album in entirety. And it was fantastic, and I finally got to get my picture with my hero. We had met one time before, but it was really nice before the show to spend some time and talk to Richie. He's just a sweet man. And I don't know if many of you know that after he sort of left the music business, he put out a few solo records after Souther Hillman Furay, but Richie became a preacher, and he was pastor at a church in Colorado outside of Boulder for many years. He retired from that, I believe, a couple of years ago, and he's also about to retire from music. And I know there's going to be some farewell shows later this year, or sometime this year up on the East Coast. So we wish Richie a great time in retirement. So again, Poco Delivering, my favorite Poco album, and as I think I mentioned, if I remember it correctly, I think it hit number 29 on the Billboard charts. It was their highest ranking record on the charts. Couple of Poco oddities before we finish. And first, I got to talk about the shirt. This is my country rock shirt, and I bought this 35 years ago. It barely fits. I wanted it, but God, I used to wear overalls and flannel shirts all the time. I was just such a country rock nut back in the day. And I bought this shirt at Nudies in Hollywood. Now, is that cool or what? Now, I bought it off the rack. It's 100% polyester. It isn't like, anything famous like, the famous Nudie suits that the Bluto brothers or other people used to wear. But it was really cool to get to go to Nudies and say that I own something from the store. That's a real distraction there. Anyway, couple other things I want to mention about Poco, and I know a lot of you Poco fans are saying, hey, he forgot something. Well, he didn't forget it. We'll get to it. I know if you know what I'm talking about. But before we get to that, there was a compilation called The Forgotten Trail. If my memory serves me right, that this came out sort of at the dawn of the CD age. It may have even preceded some of the reissues of the CDs from vinyl. It's 2 discs. What's notable is there's some unique tracks here for the first time. Worth trying to track down for those tracks if you can get them. I do think, and I may have been lax on this, I think there may have been some reissues of the earlier catalog with bonus tracks. I'm going to have to do some tracking down on that. But the thing I alluded to a few minutes ago is back in 1989, you may have remembered this artist from MTV named Richard Marx. I personally didn't care for Richard Marx music, and one day Richard Marx discovered this band and said, hey, Poco is pretty cool. Whatever happened to them? Let me get them back together. And somehow Richard Marx got Poco back together, and in 1989, the original band, including Messina, Meissner, and that would be with Furay, Grantham, and Rusty Young, got together and did this album called Legacy. And I actually just sat down and gave it a listen this morning. It's a good record, solid record. I just wanted to exclude it from the Core 6 records, just because I could. The only comment about this, it sounds a little 80s. It just doesn't feel like it fit back in that country rock genre. It's got the kind of slick 80s production. The opening track is a song called When It Began. That's an autobiographical history of the band that Richie sings. That's really a cute song. I really enjoyed it. There was a Rusty Young middle-of-the-road hit called Call It Love. And I'm not picking on Rusty. I love Rusty. I've seen him here in Nashville at the Bluebird. I love what he did. It's just a different sound, and it's a good one. And those were the 2 standout songs on this record. I think that original band may have done some shows, but I know that Richie, I seem to recall that Richie didn't make it all the way through. I unfortunately wasn't unable to attend it. And that sort of, was the last we heard from the original Poco we know and love. Throughout the years, though, I know Richie has showed up at a couple of Poco shows along the way. There was one here in Nashville that they put out a live record for that Richie joined him with, and unfortunately I was on vacation and missed it. That was my tough luck. But 2 last things I want to point out before we sign off here. I don't know when they did this. In 2010, this live record came out, Poco Live at Columbia Studios in Hollywood. This was something that I had on a cassette copy. Remember back when we used to trade cassette tapes of FM broadcasts? I had a very watered-down version, a copy of a copy of a copy. But this came out as an official release on, I'm not sure about the label, Collector's Choice Music. Listened to this yesterday, too. It's great. It's really good. It's got some great songs on it. This is the Paul Cotton Band with Timothy Schmidt as well. It was interesting to hear I believe From the Inside had just come out, although, yeah, Bad Weather is on here. And also, it was very interesting. Richie kept referring to, we'll do another one from the live record, we'll do another one from the live record. So they were sort of still sort of promoting Delivering. But it's a very sharp contrast to Delivering, where that live record you heard the raw energy and the vitality of the crowd. Here it's kind of a dull, flat studio audience, but nonetheless a great performance, good listen to it, but you just don't feel that exciting live feel of being at a Poco show. And then one last thing, I love to read about music, and there's always a rock and roll bio on my nightstand. And I just do want to put a plug in for Richie's book, Picking Up the Pieces. Fantastic story of his career with the Buffalo Springfield and Poco. And definitely, if you're a Richie fan, I would recommend this greatly. Well, thank you again for being with us today. This was kind of a fun one, a little genre shift for us. We're going to look at some more country rock bands. I've got a good history with the movement. Still goes on today. They call it Americana, I guess, in a lot of respects. But certainly Americana wouldn't be what it was today without the things that people like Richie Furay and Jimmy Messina, Paul Cotton, Rusty Young, Timmy Schmidt, George Grantham had done. I love you guys in Poco. Please, if you like what we're doing, share and subscribe. We'll see you again next time.